everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Welcome to Black History Month. While we all know that Black history is American history and should be celebrated all year long, in February we pay particular attention to the contributions of African Americans in making our nation great. Today, an Another View history lesson, a conversation with abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman Mr. Frederick Douglass, as portrayed by poet and scholar Nathan Richardson. Walk with us through history, lessons from the past, and inspiration for the future. Another View is next, so stay tuned.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. It's Black History Month. It is the month of February, and there are so many things going on in the community this month. Just want to tell you about two of them very, very quickly. Tomorrow, Saturday, February the 2nd, from 11 to 5 at MacArthur Mall at the MacArthur Center, there will be Afromania, and they're going to have fashion shows, dance performances, fro fitness, sounds kind of interesting, and all other kinds of events. There are book signings at Barnes & Noble, cultural programs at the Center Court. Come on out, have a great time, and celebrate. If you want to know more, you can dial 757-285-9833, 757-285-9833. And next Friday, February the 8th, come see the premiere of WHRO's and the City of Norfolk's documentary on the Addicts Theater. The Addicts turns 100 this year, and our very own Lisa Godley has produced a 30-minute documentary. It will be premiered at the Addicts, and the doors open at 7 p.m. It is free. The Mayor Kenneth Cooper Alexander, will bring welcoming remarks, and then Lisa will host a post-screening panel discussion. So come out, be the first to see it before it goes on TV, and that is next Friday, the 8th, at the Addicts Theater. Doors open at 7, and the documentary will be shown at 8 p.m. There are tons of other activities that are out there, so get out there, get involved. So he was born into slavery about 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland. His mother was of Native American ancestry, and his father was of African and European descent. His original name was Frederick Bailey. He took on the name of Douglass after escaping from slavery. From such humble and horrible beginnings, he went on to fight against slavery, fight for the rights of women to vote, and authored several books and speeches, even though he had very little formal education. He remains an inspiration to us today, and we are honored to have him in the studio with us, as portrayed by poet and scholar Nathan Richardson. Mr. Frederick Douglass, welcome to Another View.
Good afternoon, fellow citizen. It's great to be here.
Thank you so very much. You know, when you look today at what your place in history, did you ever think as you were living your life that you would be such a prominent person?
Well, I'm so happy that my history has been preserved by my second wife, Helen Pitts. She promised me that she would preserve my history and Cedar Hill. And it is great to be called back to the 21st century, the modern era, and receive some recognition. So when someone opens a book and they speak to Frederick Douglass and I appear, it is quite surprising, the reaction that I get and people who know my legacy.
So let's start at the beginning, because there's so much to your life. But I really want to understand, because we teach school children in today's 21st century about slavery. We've all learned about slavery, but we're several generations now removed from the actual act of slavery.
Yes.
So can you talk about what it was like for you growing up?
Well, first of all, in that context, we were not slaves. We were Africans who were enslaved. And that history, and we should be celebrating today.
Why do you make a distinction? Why do you make that a distinction?
Well, because number one, you can enslave not only black men, but white men, and anyone who enslaves an individual. I would argue the fact that they be enslaving themselves as well. You cannot chain a man's wrist without chaining your own wrist. And so from that standpoint, the men and women who came here in 1619, and as a matter of fact, we're celebrating the 400th. I believe you all would be celebrating the 400th commemoration of the first Africans landing here at Port Comfort, which is also the start and finish, so to speak, of slavery in America. And so as we take that into consideration, we take the whole context of where the African is in America, we should start with the fact that they came from Africa. Many of them were noble people and enslaved, put in bondage. And in spite of that enslavement, we rose and did great things for this country and helped found this democracy.
But you as a boy, was there something inside you that just told you right from the beginning, this is not the life that I'm going to continue to live?
Well, certainly I as a boy, with the rations for a juvenile on a plantation, no coat and no hat, no pants even. I didn't get my first pair of trousers until I was 8 years old. I slept on the cold, hard ground with a burlap bag over my head. My feet were out, and many times I got, on a time this year, it's very cold outside, I would have gotten frostbite on my feet. And so with that experience, I didn't have too much knowledge to be able to quantify my misery as a slave. But I do remember standing on the shores of the eastern shore of Maryland, Talbot County, looking at the ships sailing in the Chesapeake Bay, and that captured my imagination. There was freedom out there somewhere.
So what did you do? What kinds of chores or responsibilities did you have as a child before you were sent to Baltimore?
Yes, well, children too young to work in the fields would have been given menial chores, and my chores were to sweep the yard and keep the leaves picked up, to make sure that the animals, the pigs and horses, didn't get too far out of the gate. As a matter of fact, the rations I was saying was very meek, and I was hungry many times. Either I would go to Mrs. All's window and sing a song and hope she might pass a biscuit out the window. But I did have this one favorite horse who would frequently run away to the next plantation about 5 miles away. And when I went to bring the horse back, I realized he was going to the other plantation because there was more hay on that plantation than Colonel Lord's plantation. And so I found out that I could also get some food on that plantation. So I frequently left the gate open so that we could both run and get a meal.
Now, you were sent to Baltimore.
Yes. Well, Ms. LaQuisha All came to me and she said, Frederick, come here. We're going to send you to Baltimore to live with our cousins, Mr. Hugh and Sophia All, and make sure that get yourself cleaned up. We're going to give you your first pair of breeches and put you on a ship and sail you to Baltimore. My task there at around 9 years old, was to be the helpmate for their young son, Thomas. And so I was to be there and help him get prepared for school in the morning, fix his bath water, walk him to school and back and such.
Now, Mrs. Aldo, she taught you.
Yes, I was
your alphabets.
Certainly, in Baltimore, they had not been slave owners before, and so they were not accustomed to the rigorous and awful treatment that most white people gave slaves. And so when I met Mrs. All for the first time, I was quite surprised at the smile on her face. She invited me in, offered me a bed and something to eat. And it turns out she was an avid reader and read the newspaper and the Bible, and I would certainly cozy up next to her, beside her rocking chair, and she would read a passage or teach me an A, B, or C. So
you stayed in the main house? You stayed in the house?
Yes, I did. I certainly did.
Wow. Okay, so why then how did you wind up back on the plantation? And particularly around the age of 16, a gentleman by the name of Covey?
Yes. Well, certainly, first of all, once I had those words to define the misery that I felt as a slave, it came true what the master says: an educated slave is a worthless slave. Because once I had those words to describe my misery, I started feeling the pull of freedom. and I became somewhat unruly. So they sent me back to.
Did you try to run away?
Absolutely. I tried to run away, and they put me under the servitude of Mr. Edward Convey, who was a notorious slave breaker. And that's where I got the lash on a regular basis. He certainly tried to break my spirit, but I might say he was unsuccessful in that endeavor.
As a matter of fact, you railed back against him, didn't you?
Well, that was the first time I decided to fight for my freedom, and I fought Mr. Convey. We had a duel that went on for about 30 minutes. And at the end of that, although he pretended like he had won the tussle, he said, well, Frederick, that will teach you not to disobey me again. But, of course, he could have taken me down to St. Michael's and put me up on the square and gotten 100 lashes. But certainly he didn't want to risk his reputation or embarrass himself by the fact that he was not able to break Frederick Douglass.
So was that at the point where you just said, I got to get out of here, I got to run?
Yeah, so I certainly partnered with about 4 other slaves, and we made our first attempt to escape from slavery. We were found out. Our plan was caught.
Who told you? Who told?
Well,
what happened?
Well, we were out in the middle of the field, and we were working, and I had this strange feeling come over me that we were found out. And I saw the constable coming across with horses and a couple of help. They were galloping at a high rate of speed. They got to the big house. They called us in and said, we have found out there's been some sort of fight here on the plantation. And when it all boiled down, they found out that we were trying to escape. I had devised a plan where I would written a note, and all of us had notes giving us a pass, a permission from our masters to go visit our relatives. And so it was not for one of us who was still holding true to the plan. We had made a pact: know nothing, own nothing. And so when they asked us to put our hands behind our back, they were going to take us in custody, a fight broke out. And I threw my note into the fire. The rest of us ate our notes. And so we ended up in jail for about 3 months. We could have ended up been sold down south.
Why do you think they didn't sell you?
Well, Captain Anthony came. I was the last one to get bonded out. And he came and he said, Freddie, he said, I've been offered a great sum of money by the bounty hunters to sell you down south. He said, but I have a great fondness for you. And Hugh and Sophia in Baltimore, I talked to them and they'd want to take you back. So they sent me back to Baltimore.
So when did you try again?
Well, I tried again. Once I got back to Baltimore, even though I was a slave, I was working in the shipyards of Fells Point. I had this deal with Mr. All that I would work in the shipyard and bring my earnings back to him. In some cases, I was making $9 a week.
That was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money, but I had to give it all to him except for 6 cents or so.
Wow.
And so that was still slavery.
Did he provide shelter for you?
He did. He did. He provided slavery, and then he provided shelter and food. And then we actually made another pact where I actually would make the money, take care of myself, and give him the balance. And that was the opportunity for my escape. Because it gave me more freedom. And so when I made that money, I could sock a little bit away to purchase a ticket that I could feel my plan of catching a train to New York and then into freedom. You
also met a free woman whose name was Anna.
Yes. I met her at one of the meetings there. I was part of a mental improvement society. And I would frequently put my head in, and I met her, and we started trading letters and such. And she was a free woman. She already had her freedom. And so we devised a plan where I would dress up as a sailor, catch a train, and once in New York, we would connect and then move on. And that plan came to fruition, and we ended up getting married.
When you got on that train and you had to go through Delaware, which was also a state that had enslaved people.
Delaware, Wilmington, yes.
So what were you thinking as you were going through and as you're on this train? And were you worried that you weren't going to make it to New York?
I certainly was. I was afraid that the engineer would come and check my papers and find out I was a traitor. The papers I borrowed, and we did this many times, many slaves running away would borrow the papers, the freedom papers from other free men. They would mail them, hopefully the description on the paper, which gave your characteristics.
So you had to find someone who looked like you, similar to you, and you would use those papers to freedom, and then you would send them back to the freed person. In this case, I decided not to do that. What I did, I borrowed a pass that Navy sailors had at that time, and I used that pass. It had less descriptions on it. And black sailors got more respect. So I was sitting there on the train, and the conductor approached me. He certainly gave me more respect than he gave the other black men on the train. When he came to me, he said, and where are your papers, sir? And I said, I don't carry my papers, sir. I don't carry my freedom papers when I'm going out to sea. He said, and what papers do you have? I said, well, I have my sailor papers right here with the U.S. Eagle on it. And I showed him, I flashed the U.S. Eagle, and I was gone out of Delaware. But then I did run. There was other times where my nervousness was heightened. I ran into people who knew me, and really,
and just my great fortune that one didn't see me. As a matter of fact, when I was in Wilmington, the train pulled up. I'm headed north. Mm-hmm. The train going south. There was a gentleman from the plantation who certainly would have recognized me. And when I saw him, I was quite startled. But he was not looking my way, and so the trains moved on.
Oh. So even when you got to New York, you still were not technically free.
Certainly not.
You were a runaway.
I was a runaway.
So were you constantly looking over your shoulder?
I was looking over my shoulder. I was certainly schooled by a black man right off early upon landing in New York that you could not even trust black men, Negroes in New York, because some of them were spies and bounty hunters. There were great sums of money being paid to catch runaway slaves. And so you had to be very cautious about who you spoke to. And fortunately, I did find someone that I could trust, and they gave me room and board for the night, and then I moved on to freedom in Baltimore.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What questions do you have for Mr. Frederick Douglass? 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. I'm trying to kind of go through your life a little quickly here because I want to get to ask you about some current events too. But at what point did you decide that it was important for you to start speaking out against slavery, become an abolitionist, to really start to let your voice be heard?
Yes, well, I was reading the Liberator newspaper, published by William Lloyd Garrison and the abolitionist movement. I was reading that newspaper on a daily basis, and then I started attending some of their meetings, some of their abolitionist meetings. Mm-hmm. And there they, just in talking to me, found out that I had an interesting story and eventually asked me to stand up and speak to one of the groups. And I was quite nervous that first time of giving my affirmation of a slave from Maryland. But there was quite a warm response, and I soon got over my nervousness. So
here you
speaking.
are, a black man speaking in front of an all-white audience?
Mostly white audience. There were some men, of course, there were black men who were free in Boston. Mm-hmm. And so it was a great gathering of abolitionists. You still had to be somewhat cautious. There could be spies in the audience, and they protected me. While I spoke. I would certainly get rousing applause, and there would be occasionally, if we were speaking out in public on the street, rotten eggs thrown at me. So you had to have not only courage to say what you had to say, but for those who wanted to accost you for what you were saying.
And at one point, too, you also wound up going overseas. Was that to avoid being caught or being re-enslaved?
Absolutely. Well, after getting in front of a wider audience, they began to question my authenticity. They said, well, you say this man is a slave, but he can read, he can write, and he is so eloquent, well-spoken. Surely he's not a slave. He's some man who's been to college, and you are pawning him off as a slave. And so when I went to Mr. Garrison and asked them, what should I do? They said, well, Freddie, you need to start naming names and places. Until then, I was protecting the identities of my slaveholders, slave masters, Convey, Sevier, those slave breakers. And so to prove my authenticity, I started naming those places. That's when I wrote my first narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. When I took the manuscript to Mr. Garrison and my fellow abolitionists, one of them said to me, if I were you, I would throw that in the fire. I mean, it was very inflammatory. And so they said at that point that it would be to my prudence to go to England and spend some time there. And so they put me on the ship, and I landed in Liverpool, Ireland, and found that place so hospitable that I stayed there 4 months, and then on to England.
And were you treated? So you were treated better?
Yes, I was treated better. Of course, England had already abolished slavery. And then Mr. Daniel O'Connell, the leader of Ireland at that time, was very hospitable. He was certainly an abolitionist in his own right. And so they started calling me the Black Daniel O'Connell. They were very welcoming. I went all over Ireland and all over.
So why didn't you stay as opposed to coming back? What made you come back to the U.S. knowing there were people there who either wanted to put you back into slavery or shut you down or in some other way harm you?
Certainly. It was something that I had to really be concerned with. They offered me money to bring my wife over at that time, Annie, and my oldest daughter.
She had 5 children, right?
I had 5 children, yes. I had 5 children. And they offered to buy me a house and bring my family over. But I did, at that time, I was feeling my fellow slaves, my fellow men and women in bondage, and I wanted to go back to advocate for their freedom. And so I made that decision. And so they agreed to purchase my freedom. They raised the money to purchase my freedom. As well as another stipend for me to start my newspaper, the North Star. So I left with England with some money in my pocket to start my abolitionist movement.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman Mr. Frederick Douglass, as portrayed by poet and scholar Mr. Nathan Richardson. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Greg joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Greg. You're on the air.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to go back in time with you, Mr. Douglass.
Thank you, fellow citizen.
Looking at your biography, I noticed that you were not a shrinking flower. You stood and physically defended yourself on numerous occasions. If I understand correctly, even as a slave and even as a freeman, when you got accosted in certain cities up north. And I'm curious as to how did you literally survive that, not being lynched or killed for laying your hands on a white person, be either as a slave or free?
Yes, well, I can certainly.
Thanks for the call, Greg. Go ahead.
I certainly remember being accosted on the streets of Baltimore and Fells Point. There was a great disparity, a great anxiety between black and white shipbuilders, and I was accosted by about 5 white men who wanted to just beat me up. They beat me up, kicked me. I was laying on the ground. One of them kicked me in the eye, almost, broke my eye socket out.
Oh, my.
And I fought back. There were about 30 men standing, watching.
And they didn't help you?
Of course, they did not help me. And even after I went back and told my master, Mr. Hewall, about the incident, he was somewhat and very concerned about the fact that I had gotten accosted and beaten up. His wife she was very, she comforted me quite a bit. She put a cold, fresh steak over my eye to heal that. And we went down to the shipyard and talked to the shipmaster. And he said, well, who will stand up and witness to the fact that this man was accosted, who was who was beaten up, and no one was there. And so that was the situation in all over America. Any slave could not testify against a white man, and unless you had a white man to testify in a court that you were accosted, beaten, or murdered in that case, then nothing would come of the charges.
So when you, by the way, Mr. Douglass, my hometown is Baltimore.
Yes.
I didn't know if you knew that.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yes. Just wanted you to know that. But when you started the North Star,
Yes.
and you were writing about, tell me some of the topics. What would you write about? And what were you trying to get your fellow enslaved folks to know? Or were you just writing to abolitionists to get them to help spread the word even more about why slavery was so bad?
Certainly, I was writing to all of them. I moved my family, actually, from Lynn, Massachusetts to Rochester for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want my paper to compete with Mr. Garrison's Liberator. And two, I thought that in Rochester I would get my children a better education. And so I moved to Rochester for that reason. I started the newspaper, and I wrote about a number of things, including news, culture, and such. I would reprint excerpts from books reviews, not only black books by African authors, but also books by noteworthy authors on the Caucasian side.
How did you learn to trust white people?
Well, certainly you can look into the window of a man's soul and get a glimpse that he has a sincere heart. And it was just by the fact that my experience, certainly in going to Baltimore, gave me an opportunity to see the other side of the Caucasians. And then when I went to England and Ireland, I saw that being inside this box of America will certainly jade your view of the world. And when I arrived in England and Ireland, I was treated with respect. I was treated not as chattel property, but as a man. I sat and dined with even the ambassador of Ireland on equal footing. I went into the same churches. I did not sit on the black pew or the black balcony. I took the Lord's Supper alongside my fellow white citizens.
Were you disappointed that there were black men who would have turned you in? Or did you get pushback from others of your own kind who?
No, it was a normal thing for Negroes who had been convinced that their plot in slavery was of divine calling, that God intended them be enslaved, and had a great love and affection for their masters, and so they were very loyal. And this was even on the plantation. And so getting out into free territory, I had already been reading about these traders, and so you just had to navigate the landscape, so to speak.
Mr. Douglass, I was talking with a friend of mine and telling her that I was going to be speaking with you. And her reaction was they considered him an uppity Negro back in the day. Do you take that characterization?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to, we're speaking from the modern era, and I don't know exactly what she has read about the 19th century, but certainly I didn't feel that in my time, maybe until later in life when I had accomplished some things and was less accessible to my fellow black brethren. But in all times...
Less accessible. That's interesting. Why were you less accessible?
Well, I was very fortunate when I moved from Rochester back to Washington, D.C. My sons at that time, this was after the Civil War, they had become decorated men. Both. My son Lewis and Charles were in the 54th Regiment. One was a first sergeant, the other a sergeant major. I had somewhat of a reputation, certainly, as a speaker, as an orator. And we were able to purchase a nice home there in Southwest Washington, Cedar Hill. And so we were certainly in the middle class of the African American community. And so some of those who might have been able to access me and speak in times past might have found it more difficult to do so. But I used my home to go back and try to free and find my cousins and aunts and so forth who were still in slavery, and I brought them through, and I brought them to my home to live and start a new life.
Speaking of the Civil War, you and Mr. Lincoln had a little falling out. Or did you?
Well, certainly our relationship is very convoluted, and it took me a while to warm up to Mr. Lincoln. I had been reading his campaign propaganda, so to speak, when he was speaking with Stephen A. Douglass in Illinois, trying to get elected. But once I had the opportunity to sit in the presence of Abraham Lincoln, I saw a genuine man. We had much in common. He was a self-made man, much like myself. And when I immediately went into his presence, I felt on equal footing. I can remember a time, as a matter of fact, the second time that I was in the presence of Abraham Lincoln. And his secretary came and she said, the governor of Massachusetts is here. He would like to speak to you. And he said, no, tell him to wait. I would like to speak longer with my friend Frederick Douglass. And so I insisted. I said, well, certainly he's one of the most prevalent and respected governors in the state. You can certainly put me aside. But he insisted, no, we have much to talk about. And so from that meeting, and then a later meeting where I was in the White House after his second inaugural speech, where he insisted that I come in and dine with the celebration. And then knowing everything he went through to write the Emancipation Proclamation and unify the country, I saw in him a genuine man.
Were you disappointed with him, though, that he did not provide the vote for black men, especially since the blacks had fought for the North and had fought, to get the freedom?
Well, certainly when I went back the first time, of course, I was trying to convince him to allow black men to fight. We had examples from the Revolutionary War, the Black Men of Massachusetts, all these men, Crispus Attucks, who served to make this country, founding of this country. So why not give that same opportunity to Negro in the Civil War? And they did. But then I had to go back, and we had three main objectives in going back to Abraham Lincoln, because we were not getting equal pay. We were not getting commissions, and there was no such thing as a black prisoner of war. If you were caught fighting on the side of Union, you were hanged right there on the spot. And so we wanted these things rectified, and he was very attentive to our concerns, and we did end up eventually getting equal pay near the end of the war. And some of the other things not so quickly.
Not so much.
But he was a man who wanted to do good without doing harm, and that is important when you're trying to bring two warring sides together, is to make compromise.
You also fought for women's rights to vote.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, moving to Rochester, which is the epicenter of the women's suffrage movement, and meeting all the women of the suffrage movement, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott. And I was right there with those women having tea, talking about their suffrage. And they convinced me that the abolition could be broadened for universal suffrage of men and women. And so they invited me to sign their Declaration of Sentiments. And when they drafted that document, I was one of 33 men who signed the Declaration of Sentiments.
Let's go to Sean in Norfolk. Hi, Sean. You're on the air.
Good evening. Nice to speak with you today.
Nice to speak to you, fellow citizen.
I just had a brief question regarding the confluence of what y'all are getting into now, the aspect of the women's suffragette movement and the vital role that your founding the Black Press played in that, and how it extends to today and our still search for attainment of real, true, lasting equality for all of our citizens.
Thank you for the call, Sean. Mr. Douglass?
Yes, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I would certainly want to bring to your attention, and I don't know if you all are aware of this, but yesterday was the anniversary of the 13th Amendment passing through the Senate and the Congress. And so I celebrated with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the women of the suffrage movement that great victory that was passed and eventually ratified, and then the 14th Amendment giving us citizenship. But when it came to the 15th Amendment, when it came and was ratified that black men would get the right to vote, they were certainly upset. A woman scorned, so to speak, the fact that they had to wait their turn for the right to vote.
Yeah.
And so it came to be that the strong bond that I had with those women went into somewhat of a cold spell where we didn't talk for a decade because the newspapers, everyone exploited the fact that they were so angry about being left out of the equation. Mm-hmm.
So we got about 5 minutes left to talk to you.
Oh, goodness.
But I do want to talk about the fact that your second wife, after
Yes.
Anna that passed,
Yes.
was a white woman.
Yes.
How was that received on both sides?
Well, it was received about as well as it's received today. When I'm speaking, I come to the modern era and I reveal that my second wife was Helen Pitts, and she was a white woman. I'm surprised that in this modern age they're quite astonished even. But when I married Helen Pitts, who had been working for me for a number of years.
She was a lot younger than you too, sir.
Well, it was as much a surprise, her age, 20 years younger, as it was her color. But of course, I do want to give all due respect to my wife, Anna Mary, who I was married to for 40 years, gave me 5 beautiful children, and who I could not have escaped or become all the things I became if she were not taking care of my home. And I was quite depressed after her death. But once I came to my senses and found happiness in Helen Pitts, my first attempt to calm everybody's curiosity was to say, my first wife was the color of my mother. My second wife was the color of my father. And they were quite surprised. My father was rumored to be my master, Captain Anthony, and that didn't satisfy them. But then I went on to explain that if you're fighting for universal suffrage, if you're fighting for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and you win that prize, which I thought I did, why should you sell yourself short and take only half of the happiness? White men do what they want to do, and black men want equal footing in America, regardless of our decisions. What I find unusual about this modern age is I ask the question: has anti-miscegenation been abolished in America?
I know, and it hasn't.
Well, I was told that it had. I thought there was this, and I don't know much about your Supreme Court cake courses after my death, but someone told me that the case of Loving versus Virginia.
Yes, that's true, but the attitude is what I'm speaking to.
Exactly.
Is the attitude.
And so our attitudes have a lot to do with our relationship to the Constitution.
Although it's getting a lot better. I think.
Yes.
I think.
And so I would say to anyone who might be shocked about my marriage would be, how can you be for Loving versus Virginia and be against Douglass versus Pitts?
And with that, Mr. Douglass, we have to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to speak with Nathan Richardson. We'll be right back.
Oh, freedom, freedom. Oh.
And we're back with Nathan Richardson, who portrays Mr. Frederick Douglass. That is just incredible. How long have you been doing this?
This makes my fifth year.
Why Frederick Douglass? What was your curiosity about him? that made you decide
I've
to?
always been, I guess history was my second favorite subject to writing and poetry. But I really had to be coaxed into it. A good friend of mine, I don't know if you know her or not, Sheila Arnold, who's an outstanding storyteller and done all over the country, came to me. We were down in the Little Theater in Smithfield and said, you ought to do a historical character. And I wasn't warm to the idea, but she kept coaxing, and she didn't tell me who. She just said to do somebody. And so I started looking at various characters and found out or realized that Douglass and I had somewhat of a resemblance. I had the beard already. If I could just grow some hair, then I would be good to go. And I started giving it my serious attention, especially once I started reading his words and the eloquence and the metaphoric content, the imagery of what he had to say. I felt that I could capture it.
What do you think Mr. Douglass would think of the state of the Black community today?
Well, I tell you, I've looked at it not only from Douglas' perspective, but W. Du Bois and so forth. We have certainly made great gains. I would say that we've probably made it from the bitter taste of slavery and our freedom to the sweet taste of freedom in our slavery to the bitter taste of slavery in our freedom. Because although we have made a lot of gains, we have had some serious setbacks. And then in other cases, we have not accomplished what even, say, Du Bois wanted us to accomplish. When Bois gave us the task of the talented 10th, which was I don't know how many years ago, but do we have more than a 10th now, today?
Yeah.
Some of the reports just out are saying that the home ownership of the African American community is where it was 50 years ago. So what I try to pass on to people who attend my performances is that we have to do more. We have an obligation to do more than just experience and enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have to give back. Our goal should not just be to create wealth, but to establish foundations and institutions and churches and so forth. So rather than building the foundation of a mansion, build a foundation where it can give other people opportunities to do great things.
So if Frederick Douglass were here today, what do you think he would tell particularly young people about why it is so critical for them to be involved in the political process, to be involved in their communities, to be productive citizens?
Yes, because it's their future. We don't inherit the past from our ancestors. We borrow it from the children of the future, and so it's their future. And they should be engaged. They should be civically engaged. They should want to vote. They should want all the things that Douglass wanted, based on the fact that he was denied those things. He was denied the right to vote. He was denied his freedom. He was denied education. And so that's what motivated him for those things. So they should savor the opportunity for education. They should savor and fight for their right to vote. They should be engaged, civically engaged in the community, in society, in the Constitution.
Isn't that the reason why Black history is so important? I mean, in the context of why history, period, is so important, but particularly for the African American community to understand what happened so that we don't repeat those same things going forward. It's
very important, but unfortunately, the way our history has been told in bites and microseconds, it hasn't done us much good. I mean, how much do we know of, say, Martin Luther King, except for I Have a Dream?
Exactly.
Do we know some of the more? And this is something that I face with doing Douglass. Everybody wants to know, well, Mr. Douglass, on this date, what did you do? And this date, and frankly, I'm not even concerned about remembering all those dates in portraying Frederick Douglass. I'm concerned about the why, not the when. It's more important that we know why these great people did these things.
Well, the one thing I learned about Frederick Douglass that I didn't know was that he was the first African American to be on the ballot for president. Is that right?
Yes. The state of Kentucky had a woman on the ticket, Victoria Woodhull, and they sent him a telegram and asked him to run alongside her. He said, "I'm not going to run because I'm not a politician." So he passed up that opportunity.
Well, he actually got one vote, I understood.
Yeah. So, and I tell you what, as many people as we got running for president this year, I will go from Washington, who said, no, it was Jefferson who said, the best politician is a reluctant citizen. Yeah.
Do you think that? What do you think Douglass would have said about Barack Obama?
Oh, certainly he would have not even been able to fathom that a black man could reach that lofty scale. But he would certainly have been proud of the reputation that he gave us. He certainly, in his 8 years in office, gave us little to point a finger at.
Are there people who, are you surprised at the either knowledge of or lack of knowledge of Frederick Douglass as you present?
Well, it's not just Frederick Douglass. What is more scary is the lack of knowledge of the Constitution. This is across the board that Americans are woefully illiterate when it comes to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And therein lies the trouble and the danger when people who claim they know the Constitution can tell you what the Constitution says, and it doesn't say that. Douglass actually made the comparison quite frequently of the Bible and the Constitution, and that there's no evidence that the Bible is a bad book because those who profess to believe in the Bible are bad. Right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with the Constitution. Don't throw away the Constitution because there are people misrepresenting the Constitution. Mm-hmm. But your Bible or your book of faith, whether it be the Quran, the Torah, or whatever, should be about the same proximity to your person as the Constitution.
Where are you performing? We got like 30 seconds
left.
left.
My performance coming up on Saturday, tomorrow, is at the Mariners Museum at 1 p.m. That's going to be a really nice venue and nice event. I'm going to talk about Douglass's his time on the maritime and his ties with shipping and all that kind of thing. And I have about 30 more performances already booked.
What's your website?
www.scpublishing.com. www.scpublishing.com.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Nathan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Barbara. It was fun.
And we'll be right back. And those of you who had called in and we could not get to your questions, just send them to us on Facebook. We'll be happy to send them to Mr. Douglass for an answer. So there you go. America said goodbye to yet another music icon this week. Singer-songwriter James Ingram lost his battle with brain cancer. During his nearly 5 decades in music, Ingram netted 2 Grammys and 2 Oscar nominations for soulful ballads that captivated audiences. Our Lisa Godley looks back at the man and the music that helped shape a generation.
I did my best, but I guess my best wasn't good enough. 'Cause here we are back where we were before.
His ballads drew us in, warmed our hearts, and made us think. At the age of 28, after years of singing background and playing piano for Ray Charles, Quincy Jones asked Ingram to sing lead on his album, The Dude. Surprisingly, Ingram didn't want to. He didn't think his voice was good enough to sing lead.
Can we figure out what we keep doing wrong? Why we never...
Jones convinced him to sing lead on Just Once and 100 Ways.
Compliment what she does. Send her roses just because. If it's violin she loves, let them play.
Any doubts he had about singing lead were surely squashed when the dude became a multi-platinum international success. Ingram became the first singer to ever open the Grammy Awards show by singing a ballad, and the night only got better. He netted a Grammy for Best R&B Vocal and became the only artist to do so without having his own album in release. 2 years later, he'd win his second Grammy with a duet where he joined forces with Michael McDonald. It was the most played song of the year. That same year, he released another standout ballad, There's No Easy Way.
When it falls apart, there's no easy way to break somebody's heart.
His talents as a songwriter were utilized by some of the most recognized names in music history. One of those songs was performed by the King of Pop on his Thriller album. They called it Pretty Young Thing. Throughout his career, James Ingram performed at sold-out stadiums both in the U.S. and abroad. During that time, he teamed up with Patty Austin twice. The first time in 1982 when they recorded How Do You Keep the Music Playing?
And since we know we're always changing, how can it be the same?
And tell me how year after year you're sure your heart will fall apart.
They'd team up again in 1984, and the result was their number one hit, Baby Come to Me.
Baby, come to me. Let me put my arms around you. This was meant to be.
He would go on to net back-to-back Academy Award nominations for his music in the mid-90s. He continued to write and perform worldwide throughout the duration of his career. The self-taught musician with the voice that made us swoon passed away earlier this week. He leaves behind his wife Debbie of 35 years and their 6 children. He will truly be missed.
Someone saying a prayer.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
That we'll find one another.
Songs for a generation, absolutely. My generation, at least. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. If you'd like to hear this show again or share it with a friend, please visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. We're on Facebook, so like us, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week on Another View is the Another View Roundtable with Another View show producer Lisa Godley at the helm, leading the conversation about current events, including reactions to the State of the Union address. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Jimmy Cooper answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thank you so very, very much for listening to Another View.